On tonight's panel, Victoria Atkins is the government's Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Before her election to Parliament in 2015, she was a barrister specialising in serious organised crime. Yvette Cooper is one of the handful of Labour shadow cabinet members with ministerial experience. She served in both the Blair and Brown governments and is now Shadow Home Secretary. Before he was even 30, Piers Morgan was editor of the News of the World, followed by a long stint at the Daily Mirror. He's since forged a high-profile TV career on both sides of the pond, and now, just a little bit over 30, he anchors his own nightly news show on Talk TV. Halima Begum is in charge of the international charity Action Aid UK, who have colleagues on the ground in Gaza. Until this year, she was CEO of the racial equality think tank, the Runnymede Trust. And Jake Wallace-Simons runs the oldest Jewish newspaper in the world, the Jewish Chronicle. His newly released book, called Israel-ophobia, examines anti-Semitism through the ages and what can be done about it. Good evening from London. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to our audience here. Great to see you here in London. Of course, welcome to you at home as well. And don't forget, you can always watch this programme on a podcast after we transmit on BBC Sounds. Now, I just wanted to say, before we start, with what's happened in Israel and what is now unfolding in Gaza, understandably, there are strong emotions on this subject. And we will make sure that all views are heard here tonight with respect. And I want to, before we take our first question, Jake and Halima, I just would like to hear your reflections on the terrible human cost in these last few days. Jake, should we start with you?
Thank you. Well, it's been quite the week. You know, in my community, it's a question of degrees of separation. And my personal degrees of separation is about 2. There's nobody who I know personally, no friends or family who've been killed or who are missing. But there are many friends of friends or family members of friends who have been killed and who are missing. And the brutality, I mean, it's one of those events where you look back to the day before and it feels like a million years ago. The brutality has been horrific. You know, babies beheaded and corpses mutilated, women raped, children raped, families gunned down. In their bomb shelters. And the enormity of it, I think, still hasn't really sunk in. As a journalist covering it, it's a case of having to get your emotions and lock them away somewhere where only you know the combination and you can open it when it's all calms down. I was going to say it's all over, but that might not happen for some time. And I would just say that what it's unleashed is the hell of war, which affects civilians in Gaza, as well, obviously, as civilians in Israel. And like everybody else, I'm sure in this audience, sitting at home, everybody in the Jewish community and around the world, we all understand that every life is as precious as every other life.
Halima.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Jake, for setting the tone of this conversation today. Like you, Well, unlike you, actually, I do have colleagues and friends on both sides who have suffered fatalities. So I work for Action Aid, which is an international humanitarian agency. We have had colleagues in the office who have had relatives killed. We have colleagues in Palestine on Gaza who are being raided as we speak. So I haven't slept for 6 days because we've been trying to manage a response. What I would say is that it's humanity that we need to remember. We need to remember the humanity in this because as we speak, from the luxury of a TV studio in East London, people's homes are being raided. 4,000 people have died so far, women, children and men. Hostages still are being taken and we have air raids going on. So while we have this conversation about how we support Israel-Palestine, get to some peace talks and stop their violence, we need to come at this conversation with that humanity at our hearts.
Let's take our first question then on this subject from Poppy Farron.
Hi. How on earth do we solve the crisis in the Middle East after the horrific events?
Which is a massive question. Victoria.
Well, first of all, please thank you to Jake and to Halima for putting the very human tragedies of this at the forefront of our minds. The solution is a two-state one, but the way that we achieve that is not through the acts of terror that we have seen from Hamas over the weekend and the horrific stories that are revealing themselves to us as to the depths of depravity that have been enacted against innocent people going about their lives day in, day out. We have to hope that with the concerted support of friends and allies of Israel, such as the UK, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. We have to hope that international organisations such as the UN can help to broker talks between the two sides, but we need to be very clear.
Can you see any prospect of that?
We need to be very clear that Hamas is a terrorist organisation, so it is with the people of Palestine that we must talk, not with this terrorist organisation. They have behaved beyond our comprehension, and we cannot and must not and will not try to negotiate with them.
Yvette?
I mean, I think it's just unbearable to see the stories of what's happened, the scale of this terrorist attack, the scale of the young people killed at a music festival, children being killed. It's just the brutality of it. And I think people are still feeling a sense of shock about that. And the impact, the fact that both Israelis and Palestinians are suffering now as a result of Hamas's terrorist attack. And the most devastating thing, I think, of all of this is that this feels that this terrorist organisation, their attack, has set back the cause of peace. And I agree with Victoria that in the end, the only way to have a long-term peace in the Middle East is to have the sovereign Palestine alongside a safe and secure Israel, the two-state solution that we have talked about, but that feels so much harder as a result of
does
the
that not
terrorist
feel
attack.
further away now?
It does feel further away now. We should just be honest about that. It feels further away, but I think, though, that doesn't detract from the fact that I think all of us should still want to work towards that. And, clearly, everything that we can do, however difficult, to try and move back to that over time. But, we have to recognise this is a live situation at the moment. Israel is dealing with the fact that hostages are still being held. And, the first thing, the release of those hostages, the recognition of how damaging that is too, as well as some of the long-term things that Victoria was talking about.
Piers?
Well, I think you have to start by using the right language would be a good start with these situations. I don't want to hit the wrong tone with my host tonight, but the BBC refusing to categorise Hamas as terrorists after what they've done, I think is scandalous. And I've heard all the excuses, but you've got to call it what it is. This is terrorism of the most heinous kind. We've touched on some of the things here. Babies being burned alive. Jerusalem Post reporting tonight confirmation of these rumours that were swirling that some of them have been beheaded. A Holocaust survivor, grandmother, kidnapped and taken away, her face staring ahead with resilient determination. But my God, she survived the Holocaust and is now in Gaza, where they're threatening to execute the hostages. There was another grandmother who was murdered, and Hamas got onto her Facebook page and posted the murder so that her family would see it. There was a man on CNN today who said that his 8-year-old daughter had disappeared, didn't know what happened to her. And it turned out that she was dead. And when he was told that she was dead, he said that he was jubilant that she was dead and was not being held captive by Hamas in Gaza. Think about that. This is a father whose child has died, and he's pleased that it wasn't an alternative that is worse. So I think we have to call this what it is. I don't care what side of this argument historically you're on, and I would feel exactly the same way if Israel had perpetrated these acts on Palestinians. These are despicable acts of terrorism, and we have to start by saying it is terrorism.
And in terms of Poppy's question?
In terms of the question of whether we can get peace, I don't know how you ever forge peace with a group like this. I don't believe that decent Palestinians like what Hamas is doing. They all knew, Hamas, when they did this on the scale they were doing it, that there was going to be a ferocious response from Israel. There had to be. They're entitled to defend themselves. There will be justified arguments about what is proportionate. I don't even know how you have proportion when it comes to beheading babies. What is proportionate for that? So Israel has come under an attack in the way that America did with 9/11. So it's incredibly difficult to see where peace lies here in the near to mid-term future if Hamas remain in control of Gaza. I think you need Hamas gone in the way that we got rid of ISIS. They're committing acts of the same appalling atrocity as ISIS. I think you've got to get rid of Hamas. You've got to get back to a more stable government in Palestine, which actually wants peace. And then on the Israeli side, you've got to have leadership that also wants to forge peace. And I worry about that too. I'm not sure that Benjamin Netanyahu is the right person anymore to do that. So I think you need fresh leadership. But how you get there in the mid to even long-term future, right now it looks almost impossible. I'm very sad to say that.
Okay. The man at the front here in the blue switch.
If Hamas ask it, is the British government willing to release prisoners? There was some discussion in the Eye that a Hamas leader has said that they might request North American and European governments to release some prisoners back to them.
So a prisoner swap.
Yeah. I don't know anything about that. I haven't read that article, but what I do know is that the British government stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel, and Hamas is a terrorist organisation. You know, the reason what Hamas are doing, and it is the most chillingly cynical thing that they are deliberately placing themselves in places where civilians are, so that when Israel rightly defends itself, Hamas knows that it will be civilians who are suffering.
The man at the very back in the striped shirt.
Everyone agrees that Hamas is a terrorist organization, but in terms of the tone, as Piers mentioned, about certain news outlets, for instance, a BBC headline had Israelis being killed and children in Gaza haven't died, like they just died magically or something. So there needs to be a responsibility as well to hold certain acts that the Israeli government might take that are not disproportionate to account, because at the end of the day, they're human lives as well.
Okay, and the woman a little bit further down, yes, with the glasses, yeah.
As you've correctly pointed out, Hamas being a terrorist organisation, Palestinian government has actually come out themselves and condemned Hamas, as in not representing their views or beliefs at all. Their sole priority is the protection of the innocent Palestinian civilians. And also the Home Secretary came out earlier this week and actually tried to condemn the presentation or waving of the Palestinian flag, associating it with Hamas. However, Hamas's flag is very different from the Palestinians. Palestinian civilians, the innocents, the more than 2 million innocent lives that are still there who are trapped as a result of this conflict. And again, just to brush up on the point that the gentleman made as well, just alone today, about 500 children, and the numbers are still climbing, have been killed. There was a report earlier from a doctor/surgeon who works in a hospital in Gaza, saying that because the electricity is cut off, newborn babies on life support are dying as well. The UN themselves actually published a report detailing the number of Israeli deaths and Palestinian deaths from a period of 2008 to 2020. There were 5,600 Palestinian deaths recorded in comparison to 251 Israeli deaths, and over 115,000 Palestinian injuries in comparison to 5,600 Israeli injuries. And I'd just like to know how anyone can explain that, please, because... Okay.
Jake, so obviously there's the point made by the woman there, but also there's Poppy's question, which is how on earth do we solve the crisis in the Middle East after the recent horrific events?
Well, I mean, you know, Hamas, is very nice to hear everyone calling them terrorists, which is what they are. Not only are they terrorists, but they share an ideological root with ISIS and with Al-Qaeda in the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think we've all seen that today. There's been, in the last few years, certain elements, particularly on the political left in the Labour Party in the previous Labour administration, had a very soft view on Hamas. Jeremy Corbyn famously called them his friends and said that it was a historic mistake to call them terrorists. Well, I think the historic mistake was made by him, because they've been revealed to be using exactly the same methods as ISIS. Now, that's what we've got in Gaza. On the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, who you mentioned, you say they've come out and condemned these actions. I have not seen that. I saw, certainly on the day of the event, of the atrocities, they said they supported them and said that it was an act of resistance. So I'd be interested to see your source there. But the...
should we let her reply?
Actually, just on the BBC the other day, actually, the ambassador for Palestine actually came out on an interview on live TV to basically say their priority is solely protecting the Palestinian civilians. They condemn Hamas. Hamas does not speak for the Palestinian government or the people.
I mean, you're right that there's a big rivalry between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. They had a civil war some years ago. But the president of Palestine, the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, did support the attacks, saying that they were a reasonable act of resistance. And he is serving the 18th year of his 4-year term in office. Democracy does not exist on the West Bank. It's a corrupt and brutal authoritarian regime that enacts awful acts of violence on its own citizens as well. So what I'm trying to say is that Palestinians, I'm not saying, are extremists as a people. There's an extremism in their leadership which is not serving them well. I've got an old colleague of mine, I used to be a foreign correspondent, I've got an old colleague of mine in Gaza right now, and I spoke to him just a couple of days ago, and he said that on the ground in Gaza there's a big support for Hamas, but there's a sizable minority of people who, as he put it, can't see the point of it. Understatement of the century. They understand that Hamas has unleashed this hell of war on the heads of their own civilians. And until this problem of extremism is solved, it's very difficult to see how peace negotiations can happen. What I would favour in the meantime is a doctrine known as shrinking the conflict, which the former Israeli government was trying to apply, which is, without having a grand plan for solving peace in the Middle East, let's try and make things a bit easier in the meantime. Maybe on the Palestinian side, removing some checkpoints, easing some restrictions, whatever you can, confidence building, so you can eventually edge to a point where peace negotiations can take place on the principle that in Israel, 70% of people agree on 70% of the issues. Let's look at what we can agree on. I think that kind of pragmatic step-by-step approach may get us to a point where peace negotiations can happen, but right now that feels further away than ever. Right now, there's a war because of this horrible jihadi atrocity that Hamas has committed.
Now, Jake, you're here on the panel, obviously, as editor of a very long-standing and widely read Jewish newspaper. It has come to my attention a tweet that you put out just a few days ago, which you then deleted, which has offended many as Islamophobic and has used terms I can't actually repeat here on this programme. So I want to ask you, do you still stand by it or do you apologise for it?
Well, why can't you repeat it? It's not Islamophobic at all.
Well, that's not the view that many have taken. It has used language that I'm not comfortable with.
It was jumped on by a lot of critics.
Well, I think let's just hear what Jake has to say, if you don't mind. Well, we have strong guidelines for good reason about things we can and cannot say on television. I'm not comfortable.
What I would say is that it was in response to pictures of crowds of people in the Palestinian areas and elsewhere celebrating these atrocities, dancing, singing, handing out sweets, and experiencing great jubilation. And what I said was that was a brainwashing that's a problem. And these are people who are celebrating the butchery of my people, and that is a problem. Now, the problem is not...
But I'm asking you, because you deleted it, I'm just asking, do you stand by it, or do you think it was the wrong thing to say?
The problem is not that they're Muslim. The problem is that they've been brainwashed by these jihadi fanatics. That is what I said. That is what I said. I said they were brainwashed.
The Muslim culture is a death cult.
No. I said they were brainwashed. I said brainwashed.
I have the tweet.
Brainwashed by a death cult. And I said many, but not all. And I stand by that.
You said much of Muslim culture is a death cult.
I didn't.
That's what you said. Those are the exact words.
Well,
I'm quoting the tweet.
I didn't.
Let's let him answer. Thank you.
But what I would say is that that's untrue. But what I would add is that people got cross about it, and I understand that. But I look back at some of the tweets I sent around the same time. And around that same time, in fact, on the same day, I believe, I responded to somebody else who was tweeting, "Islam is the problem." And this is what I tweeted. You can check this too. I said, "This is untrue. Many Muslims are wonderful. Many have even fought and died for Israel. Let's come together as people of good conscience and stand against the darkness. I've got Muslim friends. I stand with Muslims. Any death of any innocent civilian is abhorrent, and if it's done intentionally, it is beneath contempt, whoever's doing it.
All right.
What I'm saying is that the brainwashing of jihadi fanatics takes place and is a bad thing. And I did delete it. I did delete it because tempers are so high, and I didn't want. And I'm. What I will say is that I stand by the point that these jihadis are brainwashing elements of society. But if you're offended, sir, and if I've offended other people with a clumsy wording, I certainly apologise for that. I want to be friends and allies, not enemies.
Halima, Jake, thank you. Halima, let's get back to Poppy's question, which you asked. How on earth do we solve the crisis in the Middle East after the recent horrific events?
So I think it falls on those of us who are not directly impacted by this crisis to be calm and measured and bring both sides to the table to discuss, have dialogue, and actually have a dialogue with a view to having a just solution. The solution has been on the cards for a long time, of course. You only have to look at the UN, a two-state solution that actually respects the national aspirations of both sides, but also guarantees the territorial or the security of civilians. That is the solution that we are looking for. But if we have a conversation all around the emotions that are at play here, I fear that we will not get to that place to discuss a just solution. What I'm more concerned about at the moment, Fiona, is actually the sequencing of humanitarian support. So while we have had Hamas literally shoot 1,000 rockets, Israel has responded with an air raid. We have 2.2 million people stuck in Gaza at the moment. And actually, some of the hostages are also in Gaza. So indiscriminate bomb raids is going to lead to more careless and, well, death and violence. So we need to think about the humanitarian solution before we get to the root causes of this conflict and what a just solution is. And actually, I'm quite interested in asking our minister here, what are we doing to ensure that the British government is working hard to open up a humanitarian corridor so that actually medical supplies can come in and out of the country? As a lady said, that there aren't enough medical supplies to treat casualties. If there were a lack of supplies in Israel, I'd be asking the same question, that we need to get the medical supplies in. The second question I have for our government is whether we will look to ensuring that humanitarian aid continues to Gaza, because only a few days ago the EU had a knee-jerk reaction and discussed stopping aid to Gaza, and in fact changed its mind. So we need to make sure that we are not discussing knee-jerk reactions to what is a devastating humanitarian crisis that is unfolding, and it won't stop unless those of us who are not directly affected can bring about some calm and some solutions around the table very quickly.
Yvette. So, will you work to ensure that there is a humanitarian corridor, and will you also work to ensure that aid gets into Gaza?
So I just want to, if I may, pick up one thing. There has been nothing knee-jerk about the UK government's response to this. The Prime Minister spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu over the weekend. The Foreign Secretary was amongst the first foreign ministers to visit Israel yesterday. Our Defence Secretary is with his NATO counterparts to discuss what NATO can do in this and other areas. And so there is a very, very clear, measured plan of support for Israel. But I bring it back again to the fact that Hamas has created this. Hamas is the ones
You've made that point very eloquently, Victoria. But Salim is asking specifically about will you provide aid into Gaza? So will you try and ensure there's a humanitarian corridor?
We stopped directly funding Palestinian authorities several years ago because of concerns about the administrations at the time. We continue to send aid to international partners, including the UN. None of our UK money goes to Hamas. And we know that. The reason we keep emphasising this is because Hamas is not Gaza. The people of Gaza are being let down very, very seriously and badly by Hamas. And we will always make sure that that money is properly spent. One of the most disturbing reports I've heard today, though, and I know not whether it's accurate, is of Hamas deliberately dismantling water pipes in order to build missiles. And so this goes to some of the chilling cynicism that we are seeing from this group of people. We cannot lose sight of that in all of this very, very difficult conversation that we're rightly having.
Man there in the white shirt.
I have a son living in Tel Aviv who regularly has to go to the bomb shelters. I have many family and friends whose children are being called now into reserve duty. Everything changed last Saturday in this discussion. Everything. I have been a massive advocate for reconciliation and not revenge, reaching out to Palestinians, to Arabs in much of my life. I can't see how right now, firstly, the condemnation didn't come at all from the Palestinian Authority. Nothing. Not a word, not a single word saying, not in my name. Nothing. I can't see how now Israelis who are living in fear are going to be able to get over it.
But let's.
I can't see.
We're going to let everyone's voices be heard, so please let him finish.
They're going to be able to move forward to get this trauma for generations. I'm just lost for words.
Okay, no, Victoria, sorry. And I hear what you say. Thank you very much for making your point. Look, there's a lot of you with your hands up, and we could talk about this for the whole hour. There are other questions you submitted, and I am going to come to them. We will come back to this subject, I don't doubt. Next week, very likely the week after, for some time, I suspect. So I'm going to draw a line under it here, but noting that we will come back to this subject. So thank you for all your points. Thank you to the panel.